All right, so on November 7th, 2018, we are at the end of the sprint number 13. Friday, so that's when we do the upstream release. So today, Jay and Joel will do some demo as usual. At the end, right? So Jay, you can already share your screen.
All right, hang on one second. Let me know if for some reason you can't see my screen. Okay.
I see it.
So Saturn subteam sprint 13, we did a lot of things. Some of them are not demoable because we've been focusing on hardening, bug fixing, perf work, things like that. So I'll just start with a couple of items that we did that I can't really show. I'm not going to go in detail. There's a couple of fixes, 1609 and 1830, or sorry, 1611, that have to do with removing 0.00 rates and rounding errors. So we're trying to clean that up in the graph. Some things around more sparkline corner cases in the side panels. And also the unknown node is another corner case that constantly causes us some issues. We're trying to clean that up. So overall, graph experience should be a little bit cleaner. Those are all bug fixes from the non-bug fix side of things. You'll notice the top three have to do with laying the groundwork for multi-tenancy work or multi-namespace work. So we did a variety of things in that area. And then overall, we did quite a lot of work on optimizing the performance of the graph generator. So going forward, things should be more and more snappy as you interact with the UI. There was another bug fix, Kiali 1800, that Jose Julio did some creative work on. So occasionally you would see something like this, where you would get a grouping which was really only supposed to have these three boxes, V1, V2, and V3 for details. I'm sorry, for reviews, but would encompass some other things. And Jose did some nice layout work at the cytoscape level. And to show off, he now can generate something like this, which has quite a lot of groups and very little overlap. So that is a nice improvement. So good job on that one. We also started to make sure that we were able to handle configuration server side on the UI side. So there's a new REST endpoint called API/config, which will bring to the UI or any client some information about server-side config. Specifically, you can now use a non-default Istio namespace, it defaults to Istio system, and also some of the labeling can be overridden. So in this case, you can see that I've currently set my version label name to revision, overriding the default of just version. And I'll show you how that plays out over here. So going into the graph view, we've got a variety of things to show. A lot of them are kind of minor improvements. So here's one. You can see that this lock node on the ingress gateway says that my user doesn't have access to that particular, to the Istio system namespace. And the difference is here, we now lock down the side panel with the links. So you can see where in the past, this would be an active link, and then you would have a failure trying to get there. We now show you that, in fact, it's locked down. You can see here in this label that this no longer says version, but in fact revision, which is the override of the version label that I just showed you from the getting the server-side config. So that's another change. Down at the bottom right, we've changed some messaging in the Sparkline graphs. It used to say no traffic, which wasn't really true all the time. It could be a little bit confusing because you might see some traffic indicated in the table above, and then it would say no traffic down below. But in fact, there are instances when there's very little, not enough to generate the Sparkline. So we've just improved that messaging a little bit. One other thing that's been a problem is some of the namespace handling. So for instance, if you were to go, right now we're in the book info namespace, and if I was to go investigate product page in the details view and then go back to the graph, that was being lost, and I would have gone back to my all namespace, which would show potentially a lot of information that I wasn't interested in. So now we're maintaining that context. That also works if you were to just do an F5 refresh, which I'm doing right now. So in general, the bookmarkability is working much better, where a refresh will bring you back to all the settings that you had before. If I had service nodes enabled, I wouldn't lose that on refresh and so forth. Let's see, another small improvement in the legend. Just down here in this area, we added the lock icon to indicate that if you have mutual TLS on an edge, we now have it in the legend. That's a small improvement. Let's see. In the namespace dropdown, you'll notice that we've cleaned this up quite a bit. So it's now configurable as to what namespaces you want to be able to show in your list of all namespaces. And by default, we take care of removing the technical namespaces like OpenShift, .star, and cube.star. All of those are gone, but it's configurable to bring them back if you need to. You get a much more concise list here. Also, that has an effect on performance, because if you're looking at an all namespace, for example, we won't be going through all of those technical namespaces because they're really not going to be considered. In addition, for the namespace dropdown, there was a fix, or I think it was a fix. If I was to introduce a new project in OpenShift, if I say demo, so I created a new one. If I go back to the console and drop down the namespace list, you can see that I've now got that choice. So that's active. Every time you interact with the namespace dropdown, you're going to get the most up-to-date list. Let's see. If I was to go back to a node here. And go to metrics. There was a fix here in the last sprint. These options were actually frozen, I believe, or at least it was broken at some point during the sprint. You can now go back to changing the settings here. One major change that we want to show is we've added Kiali metrics. So we're now generating metrics for our own performance into Prometheus. And you can see in this Prometheus UI, if I scroll down, a whole bunch of Kiali metrics that you can now optionally gather. And what I'm showing here in this graph are actually individual functions, API calls to the back end. So we can wrap actual Go functions in the back end on the server side and look at their performance individually to find out if something is spiking or in general what it looks like. We can, in this graph, we're showing Kiali graph generation duration. This is basically the amount of time it takes to generate a graph by type. In this case, it's a namespace graph, versioned app graph, the versioned app graph, which I basically have been generating during the demo. Probably have more data if I was to refresh this screen. You'll see, and it's been relatively consistent with one spike. Finally, the Saturn team, Viet, put together the first of a series of blogs. This one is called Intro to Service Mesh and Istio Part 1, how to set up your Kubernetes cluster. And Istio, it's on Medium along with all of the other Kiali blogs that we've put out so far. Let me think. I think that's it for Saturn. So any questions now? Otherwise, we'll go on to Joel. All right, thanks.
Thank you, Jay. Yeah, Joel, you can share your screen.
Yeah. So I'm sharing my screen. Okay, so do you see my screen?
Yes.
So we've done a couple of announcements in our European team. The first big announcement is that maybe we've laid the first stone of Kiali being an editor for Istio configuration. Currently, we're able to delete some Istio information, like for instance, if I'm going to Istio config and any of them like Istio policy, here I've got the actions button drop down that is now appearing, and I can delete the YAML, the whole file, the whole rule. So it works for any kind of Istio rule, like destination rule, virtual services, and the others. Also, yeah, for any kind of object that are listed in Istio config, it's the same here. So of course you have to get the delete permissions granted to Kiali in Kubernetes or OpenShift. And if the permission is not granted, then the delete here option will just be disabled. But once you have the permission, then you have this action that is available. You can also get the same functionality when going through the service menu. If you go to a service which has some destination rules or virtual service associated with, like I think there is a Istio policy, there's a destination rule. So here it's the same. When you go to the YAML, you have again the same action drop down. The other thing that we added in this sprint is filtering capabilities in applications, workloads, services, and in overview. Now we are able to filter by health. So you know the health, you can have a healthy, degraded, or failure status. And now so we can just filter for the healthy ones or the failures. And here we get this kind of filtering. And once we have added this functionality, the next step was to enable links here in the overview page. When we click, before these icons were not clickable. Now it's clickable, and it will lead to the application page with the active filtering on depending on what we clicked on. So here, for instance, I'm automatically redirected to applications list with the active filters on namespace and on health that we clicked on. And everything here is reflected in the URL, so it's still bookmarkable, as you said in the chat. Here we can see that I reloaded just from the URL. Then we had we did some work for performance improvements, and with a cache that has been introduced. Before that, when Kiali is querying Kubernetes objects, at every REST request received by the Kiali server, it would query again for Kubernetes objects. So now we have introduced a cache. And here in the metrics, so this is a screenshot of Prometheus, thanks to the metrics that have been added in the same sprint. Here we can see the performance improvement that can be seen when cache was introduced. So here, from the beginning until minute 38, there was no cache. And then the cache, Kiali has been restarted with cache activated. And we can see how the performance are improving. So this is the response time, the duration time of API processing. So of course, the lower it is, the better it is. And once the cache has been introduced, we can see that it's going down to something like very, very performant. By default, the cache is not enabled because there are some limitations, like with namespace permission. So it's something that is interesting to enable if we have if Kiali has permissions to access all namespaces, but else it could lead to some inconsistencies. And it's not yet designed for, as said in the chat, it's not yet designed for multi-tenancy. So we have still some work to do on the cache, but the first step is done, and we already see good performances. And finally, we fixed some compatibility issues with Istio 1.1. So this is not yet released. I mean, Istio 1.1 is still in a release candidate or snapshots. So once it will be released, Kiali should be ready, or very soonly ready to be fully compatible with this. And I think it's all for my team.
All right. Unless there's a surprise and someone has something new to show, something else to show, then. But anyone else? It's not. I'll stop the recording, but we can take questions.